Good morning. It's Wednesday, February 19th. Senate Agriculture back in business. We're going to spend some time talking to some folks about farm inputs and such. I think that looks like we might have Margaret Lagus with us, lobbyist, responsible industry for a sound. Um, Maggie, you gonna lead off?
Maggie's not on yet.
Not on.
I can lead off
Okay, sounds good. Come on up. Come up to the chair.
while we wait for everyone to
Yeah,
join.
absolutely.
My name is Jonathan Wolf from the Primer Piper. I guess I'm Kramer. I'm a lobbyist in the building. It's my first time, I think, in this community today this year. So thank you for having us. Margaret Lagus is a longtime lobbyist in the building. We work together for Crop Life America, biotech innovation organization, and responsible industry for a sound environment. I'll let everyone introduce themselves shortly. But I'll be around to ask me any questions afterwards or follow up with and that would be useful for you.
Do you want to drive the witness list as we go? Do you want to do that, Jonathan, or how would you like to do that?
I'll leave that for Margaret if she's up and running and ready to go.
I haven't received her yet.
Well, you're waiting for Margaret?
Yep.
Um,
Or do you want to, who would like to lead off, do you think?
Chairman, this is Mike Heltzer with BASF. I'm happy to just introduce myself and then hand off to my colleagues, Stephanie and Jean. Mike Heltzer with BASF Corporation. You may have heard of us. We're a leading chemistry company. One of our primary businesses, though, is agriculture, working with farmers as well as with everyday folks who want to get rid of pests. I have a little bit more to say, but want to quickly hand off to Jean and, as I said, Stephanie.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate your time this morning. I'm Gene Harrington. I'm the Senior Director of State Government Affairs for Food and Agriculture for the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO. BIO is the world's largest trade group focused on biotechnology issues. We cover healthcare, agricultural, industrial biotechnology. I cover exclusively agricultural biotechnology, so that includes companies that produce genetically engineered seeds, genetically engineered animals, biofuels, just to name a few products that my members make. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of being able to come up to Vermont and lobbying on some issues of concern. So I always appreciate the opportunity to get up to Montpelier. You have a beautiful capital. I'm sorry I'm not able to make it today, but we do appreciate your time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie as we dive in a little deeper here.
Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it very much.
Yep.
Stephanie.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to get to visit with you today, and thank you for your time. I'm Stephanie Pizzaferrato. I lead the state government affairs effort for Crop Life America for the eastern region of the United States. Just a little bit about Crop Life. Our mission is we help to ensure growers and consumers have technologies they need to protect crops, communities, and ecosystems from the threat of pests, weeds, and diseases in environmentally and sustainable ways. So that said, we'll talk here a little bit more about some of our initiatives around the U.S. and in Vermont, but I'm going to turn it over to John Gata with RISE. And one thing I'll say to you is Crop Life and RISE are under the same umbrella. Crop Life focuses on big agriculture and RISE focuses on specialty agriculture. But I'll let John Gata speak more to that. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the committee and to the chair. I had the opportunity to testify a few times last year, and I'll thank the committee for their good work on, resolving the rodenticide issue in your state, and I'm hoping that issue has been put to bed. Hopefully. So John Gata, Senior Director of Government Affairs. I cover all 50 states on behalf of RISE, and like Stephanie mentioned, we are specialty products. So those are those products that can be used in the home, in the garden, lawn care, public health, mosquito control, the products that you apply to control herbicides in lakes and bodies of water, pest control, all of those things, basically any situation where you have a pest that isn't specifically on a crop. Just wanted to say thank you again for the opportunity to meet today, and thank you for having our members come in and talk a little bit more about some of our issues.
Thank you very much, John. Margaret. I was there for a second.
Here.
How are you?
Little technology issues this morning.
No problem.
I'm fine. Thank you so much for letting us all come in and introduce ourselves. You're all new to this committee other than Brian. I have lobbied in Vermont for 35 years on agricultural issues, born and raised there. And I was married to a dairy farmer in East Hardwick. That farm is still there. That's a 500 milking cow Jersey farm. So I have a lot of background on these issues. And I really appreciate the work that this committee does. It's always been very thoughtful, and we really appreciate that. We have some very difficult discussions sometimes because there's obviously a lot of people who have concerns with issues that our companies deal with. And so we want to make sure that we're always research-based, data-based. We work very hard with the University of Vermont and Heather with all of the work that she does on farm. And so we just really appreciate that the committee is giving us some time to introduce ourselves and talk about some of our issues. The world is rapidly changing there for Vermont farmers. We see new pests every single year that we haven't seen in the past. Vermont is leading the country in conservation practices. And so that also creates both new opportunities, but also new challenges for us, because as we do less tilling of the soil and we get more organic matter into the soil, which is through no-till and cover cropping, we see different kinds of pest pressures and different kinds of cropping issues that come up. And these companies all represent the solutions to those. And Stephanie may have not mentioned it yet, but it takes about 12 years to bring product. And so a farmer may see an issue on their farm. We can't immediately, yes. Somebody just asked me a question.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, but keep going.
Okay, am I back? Okay. And so we're very sensitive to having any of the tools that Vermont farmers are currently allowed to use taken away from us, because we just don't know what the next challenge might be. And although the Agency of Agriculture has the right at any time to, in an emergency situation, approve a new product or bring an older product back, distant thing. And when a pest hits, like we had armyworm a few years ago, an entire field can be gone within 24 hours. And we just don't have time to wait for the agency to provide us with an emergency request, and then for our seed, feed, and fertilizer dealers to get that specific product in, and to get our applicators the chance to go and pick it up and get it to our farm in time to avoid what can truly be a devastating crisis for a farm. So I really appreciate this time.
Yeah. Can you go back? You started to say something about it takes 12 years, and that's when you broke up. And I don't know whether it's helpful. Sometimes if you turn the video off and just have audio, it has a less tendency to break up.
Yes, I'm actually going to let Stephanie address that, because that's her company's issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll speak to that. So each pesticide, when it comes to market, it has gone through, it starts with these companies in the R&D stage, and it takes, the average for one of these pesticides to come to market is 12 years. So that's from the R&D stages at these companies where they start the scientific research, to then to the EPA registration process, where it rigorously goes through environmental studies, right, to make sure that there's no harm to health and humans and the environment. So keep in mind when these pesticides, have been well studied. So you'll hear proponents come to you and for various reasons. And I just ask that you remember the extensive testing it's gone through, And I'll tell you, in my career, I've spent quite a bit of time on the corporate side. And these companies, you know, they want their employees, these farmers, to go home each night healthy and safe. They don't want to harm the environment. And the other thing I'd say to you is, for the materials, so like a treated seed, for example, the materials that might go on a treated seed to help it survive in the environment with in a farm field when growing, you know, that the companies put that on there because of the R&D work to show it to have better survival in the field for the environment that that seed is in. These companies would not expend the funds for material on a seed if it wasn't necessary in the various climate environments, etc. So I just say to you with those two pieces, as folks bring these agriculture issues to you, to keep some of that in mind. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Heltzer in a minute, who can speak a little bit further to that. But the other thing I'd say to you, you know, if you want to get out to farms or meet with some of the growers, you know, we'd be happy to do some of those tours, or even with some of the companies, so you can see. It's always fascinating to see some of the R&D work and some of these labs that go on. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman and members, BASF is one of those committees that is undertaking this innovation. Our headquarters for our ag business is located in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. So if any of you get down that way, you're more than welcome to come by, visit the labs, visit the greenhouses, and see what we're doing. Because like you, we recognize that farming today is more complex than ever. Controlling pests today in homes and urban settings is more complex than ever. We've got to control pests, weeds. There's a scarcity of natural resources. All this while the world is heading towards a population of 9 billion people. So all of these challenges demand that industry and government, I think, work together to continue to commit to creating innovative solutions to tackling, in the case of farming, what we like to call the biggest job on earth. And so that's really our mission at BASF, is to always help farmers strive to be the best stewards of their land. That's what we want. We're their partners. We partner with them to innovate, to implement sustainable solutions. Culture, we support a culture, as I said, of innovation and alignment with our customers' needs. Our technologies aim for healthier crops, stronger, more resistant to stress factors such as heat or drought. So, as I said, the world is changing. We're changing. We're working to meet the changes that are taking place, and we want to obviously work with all of you, and really at the end of the day be a resource for you in terms of the technology that we're creating and the solutions that we provide.
So we're you guys are, there's probably 100 different things that we can talk about, but you're talking about some treated seed. As you're very well aware, we have a ban that's coming into play here in Vermont. It's coming faster than what we think it's going to come. What's Vermont facing as far as troubles going forward? I mean, we're dropping the bucket as far as seeds that's being sold in the United States. What are we looking at as we face this cliff of the ban on neonics?
I don't know. Stephanie, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you can, or I was going to say Jean. I know Jean's worked there with Steve at the Department of Ag a lot on this topic. So Margaret, maybe you and then Jean.
Sure. You know, one of the challenges that we face is that, yes, Vermont is, you know, like a tiny fraction of a single percentage of all of the corn grown in the country. We also have a very different climate than where most of the corn is grown. So when farmers in Vermont go to buy seed corn, they're looking at some of, you know, we have a restricted number of hybrid traits that we can even pick from in the start, because we need a longer growing degree day, what they call. We have you know, we're not as warm as the places where corn is traditionally grown, and so we need to be able to have corn that can grow sometimes in less than 100 degree days. While if you're in Iowa, where they're growing millions of acres of corn, they can grow much longer season corn. And so we're already restricted in the number of options that we have when we go to buy corn. And so then if you take away one of the treatments, which is basically on all of the corn, and now we have even a smaller selection to choose from. So we also, like I said, we're the leader in conservation practices. So that also changes the kinds and types of hybrids that we can use because our soil conditions are different. You know, we're colder and wetter in the spring. So our seeds have a harder time coming up and germinating and being strong when they emerge. And then we sometimes have early frosts. And so then we have an issue with the dry down of corn. Because we can't store wet corn. It can get a fungus called a mycotoxin, which is very deadly to cows. So we have a lot of different issues that Vermont farmers are facing. And so if you start to in an already reduced number of options, if you further reduce those number of options, that makes it really, really difficult on Vermont farmers. And we only have, a few hundred of them left in the first place. So we have zero power in the marketplace. And although these companies work really hard to try to support us and help us with research through Heather Darby's work at UVM, it's just, we cannot really tell them what to do. I mean, we're not even the tail on the dog. We're like one hair on the tip of the tail of the dog. And so I really hope that you would keep that in mind when you think about, yes, New York passed a very similar law. They're also looking at delaying their implementation. They are significantly larger than Vermont. And they also have where they grow the vast majority of their corn is in southwestern New York, which is a very different climate than Vermont's climate. So even if the companies say, okay, we'll provide a non-treated or a differently treated seed for those acres, which are much larger than Vermont, it's very unlikely that the leftover seed from when New York has picked their volumes of corn is going to really work in Vermont. And so you're just really limiting our options, and it makes it very difficult. And if we have to buy in corn in any given year, it's a complete disaster for a farm. It's about 80% of the overall cost of producing milk in Vermont is the feed that we have. And so if we can't produce our own corn, high quality corn with a high level of energy, which is basically what you're getting from corn, the replacement for that is very, very expensive. And also, if we have to replace it, don't forget all of the phosphorus that is in that corn is going to come into Vermont, and we didn't put it on the soil where it was grown. Versus corn we grow here, we put our manure here, the phosphorus is here, it is absorbed by the corn, and then we feed it to our cows. We have kind of a closed cycle. If we're buying in products, we're buying in extra phosphorus that's harder for Vermont farmers to control. So, Gene?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, I think the answer to your question, Mr. Chair, is we just don't know how this law is going to shake out. Each individual company is still kind of sorting out, whether or not they're going to be able to provide non-neonic treated seed to Vermont farmers. And I know Margaret referred to the disparity in marketplace, but maybe just to crystallize it. There's several Iowa counties that companies probably sell more seed to those counties than they do the entire state of Vermont. So it's just apples and oranges, the comparison between marketplace, and that doesn't mean that seed companies don't appreciate their Vermont farmer customers. It's just that this law is creating some major difficulties in the marketplace. It's really disrupting the marketplace. So they're having to see how difficult is it going to be to provide enough non-neonic treated seed to Vermont farmers, and how does that impact our bottom line? So, we've still got 3-4 years until we hit the January 1st, 2029 implementation date. So, we'll see how things shake out. But I guess the answer to your question is we just don't know what the impact is going to be, because the companies are kind of, working through this as we go. But before I kind of stop, I do want to make one point. While we certainly, oppose the law in its entirety, there's a provision in the Vermont law that's especially mean-spirited and seemingly punitive that's not in the New York law. And it's specifically this. A provision in the Vermont law says that if the Agency of Agriculture grants an exemption to a farmer to be able to purchase and use neonic treated seed, that they can then rescind that exemption. So just think through that. They're basically telling farmers, yes, you can go ahead and purchase this neonic treated seed to use. And then at a later date, after the farmer purchases the seed, they said, no, check that. You can't do that. You can't use the seed you've spent thousands of dollars to use. And to me, that's an incredibly mean-spirited, punitive provision that I have no idea why it was included in there. But I mean, once the government says you can go ahead and do this, and the farmer acts on it and invests, makes a purchase, it just seems incredibly unfair that there's a provision that allows the agency to then take that back. And I'm not saying this agency would do it, because this agency, has been fantastic. We have a good working relationship, but that kind of just, underscores kind of just the mean-spiritedness of that provision. So that's just one kind of anecdotal example of the problems with the legislation that was enacted last year.
So if I could jump in for a second, Gene, I just want to make a point. You mentioned January 1st, 29 as the implementation date. The truth is the farmer has to decide by the fall of 28 what I'm going to buy. So it's closer than we might think. And there are members of this committee who were not supportive of what wound up being passed, even though I reported the bill on the floor. I thought we came to somewhat of a compromise. We wanted to push the implementation date out to 2031 in order for us to look across the lake and see how New York was faring with this. But that got changed on the floor with an amendment. So now we're mirroring New York's dates. But I just heard Margaret say, and this is something I hadn't heard before, that New York might be considering moving that date, which I'm not sure how in the end that whether we are tied to it if they change it, or whether we'd have to go back in and make another amendment to what was passed. But what kind of traction, Margaret, do you think that's going to get for the New York farmers to get that date pushed out?
I'm probably not the best one to answer that. Maybe Stephanie is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's exactly to the point you just made on the timing of when you purchase the seed. So Cornell has been doing some work, trying to get ready for the rulemaking process in New York. And in talking with growers, that came to light on when they need to purchase the seed and if they miss the entire growing season, etc. So that is my understanding on why, because of the timing, is why they might delay in New York. So we're following it further, but they have been having some work groups over there in that regard.
So Chair, just to clarify, there is no formal bill that's been introduced in New York at this time. It's just something that's coming out in the context of the regulatory process and the development of rules and the work of Cornell Extension.
And no other states are looking at banning that you're aware of?
There is a Kansas bill right now, I believe. Kansas, but that's not going to go anywhere. Connecticut, I believe that there's a hearing today on the legislation as well. And Connecticut seems to be driving towards something. Unclear what it is at this point. I just wanted to add, Chair and members, to what Gene had said, and really to something I had mentioned earlier about innovation. The treated seed is an example of that innovation. A really targeted application of pesticides means less foliar application of pesticides. It also, with the ban, or the ban that's going to be coming into effect in Vermont in 2029, it's fewer options for the grower in the state of Vermont. Use of older, less efficacious technologies. Hopefully we can do something, I think, to put this tool back in the hands of farmers in Vermont moving forward, because it's a lost opportunity, we think.
So what you're saying, Mike, is that if we didn't have the treated seeds, that we're going to have to just spray more pesticides.
I think that's one of the consequences you'd have to spray more. I mean, that's the whole purpose of, I had this conversation recently with a state legislator from Long Island. Where they grow a lot of grapes down there. They obviously have a lot of vegetable farms in that part of the state of New York. And I had that exact conversation and said it means less foliar application of pesticides. It's a targeted application of the pesticide at the end of the day.
And Gene, we hear you about the moving of the goalposts, and we appreciate that because we've been spending a lot of time with trying to come up with resolutions of anything that we put forward that doesn't move the goalpost. So we appreciate that comment. That's helpful. Just staying on this just for a second longer. We haven't banned neonics on other applications in the state of Vermont, correct?
Well,
And what other seeds? Well, let me put it this way. Brand new committee, so I apologize. We're an agriculture committee, so we should know, but that's why we bring you folks on, so you can educate us better. But are there any other seeds in the state of Vermont or applications that we're using that's using neonics that wasn't included in the ban?
Well, I'll just speak from the non-agricultural side. Vermont was already a state that had restricted the use of neonicotinoids. There was a handful of states in the late 2015-16 era in which there was a move to restrict these pesticides, to take them out of the hands of consumers. And so in about 40 states in the US, 40 out of 50, myself included, I live here in Illinois, I can go to my hardware store and I can purchase something that has been formulated for the consumer, and I can apply a neonic-based insecticide to treat pests in my yard. Folks like you guys in Vermont, Maine, New York, a few northeastern states have made the decision to go beyond the EPA and restricted it. And then in this bill that passed with the treated seed ban, there is also further restrictions for the use of neonics in turf and ornamental settings. So virtually for my side of the house, there will be no neonic use. There's limited exemption within that bill. And unfortunately, the folks that, take care of lawns and gardens will no longer have this tool in the toolbox. And that's going to, essentially cause over-reliance on other pesticides. As Mike just said, more spraying of other pesticides, pests become resistant to those different things, and essentially you're left with a situation where removing a major key, and neonics are a fascinating technology in their targeted use and how safe they are to the human profile. For you guys to have taken that away from those people is very detrimental to the broader green industry. So that's a very unfortunate state. I will say that New Jersey was the first state to kind of take that very big action to not just take it out of the hands of homeowners, but take it out of the hands of professionals that work in lawn care and in similar settings. But just this year, I'm having conversations with Senator Bob Smith, the gentleman who passed the bill. He now realizes that they were told that in 2021 that there was going to be new technologies that would replace neonics, and these applicators would have alternative tools. And members like Mike's company, while they have many products, there's not a one-for-one replacement at the moment, and he's strongly considering allowing us to move forward with something that allows us to reclaw some of those uses. So just to give you awareness in the region that there is a little bit of buyer's remorse, and there is some thoughtful conversations happening about unrestricting some of these uses of neonics.
Yeah, Chairman, members, I will just add to that we have a terrible spotted lanternfly problem in the state of New Jersey. And the alternative that the state has come up with is a campaign that's with a shoe or a boot that says, just stomp it out. It hasn't quite worked as well, I think, as they had intended. But I mean, you walk right outside our offices. BASF's North American headquarters, for the corporation is located in New Jersey. In the summertime, you walk right out, and the front of our building is littered with spotted lanternflies. And these are exactly the type of pests that neonicotinoids are targeted against.
I do think orchards and golf courses were exempted in the bill that we passed last year. If
Correct.
I'm not mistaken, Ariel, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. The other thing to remember is that I guess I shouldn't say this universally, most new pesticides come to the marketplace because they have a greater safety record or safety opportunity than whatever it is that they're replacing. They're either more targeted, you use less, or they have less of an effect on human health, animal health, or the environment. So anytime that you take away a technology, you're the farmer or the homeowner's only other option is to go back to an older technology, which may still be on the market, but may have a broader impact on either the environment or pets or humans. So that's the other thing to kind of take into consideration, is that every single one of these new products generally come to the marketplace because they have a much more narrower profile as far as an impact goes.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that for a second, Margaret, because going through the EPA process is not easy, right? So these companies know you have to have a better environmental profile for a new pesticide, or you're just not going to make it through the EPA approval process. So just wanted to highlight that, Margaret.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And as part of that old technology, Margaret, diamide, I think it's called.
Yes.
Generally, I think one of the general categories is organophosphates is one of the older forms of technology that's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is more harmful.
That's Roundup. Is that's Roundup basically?
No, that's
Okay.
glyphosate. Organophosphates have been phased out in use by most professional applicators because they had a broader human health impact.
Yeah. Okay, while we're just kind of talking about this committee, any more questions about this or any more that you folks want to add as far as to that? And we certainly have time. We've got another 25 minutes or so to move on to more topics. If it's anything else that you guys would like to, or we can stay on here, whatever you'd like to, it's your time. So whatever you folks would like to bring up.
I think the only thing that I'd like to bring up is that we had a lot of data last year on the safety of these products with regard to pollinators. And so it was unfortunate that was really the reason that was given for why they had to be restricted or not allowed to be used in Vermont anymore. And we have neighbors to the north that have banned these products as far as using them on treated seeds, et cetera. And we had a lot of information that showed that our pollinator health in some years was actually better than theirs as far as winter kill and those kinds of things. So there was no, we really couldn't find that there was any kind of causation. There was, you have seen that pollinator health has declined. It's declined in many areas of the world where these products are not used. So there was really no way to prove that neonics were having this negative impact on pollinators that some of those groups brought forward to the committee. And when we actually looked at the numbers, we have more bee colonies in Vermont than we used to. One of the largest beekeepers in the entire state, and they do take their bees out of state. They go down south to Georgia for a while. They sometimes go to California to do almonds, and then they come back to Vermont in the summertime because they want to keep their bees busy and going all the time, and not just keep them cooped up in Vermont in the cold weather, which is really difficult on bees. And they testified that their bees are almost 100% on a large farm in Newfane, Vermont, where they 100% use treated seeds, and their bees are very healthy and have actually gotten more healthy over the years as they've gotten better at managing the other risks, which are varroa mites. They really have a difficult time dealing with that. That's a parasite that gets on bees and negatively impacts them. In Vermont, one of the other things that they learned over the years when the Agency of Agriculture was looking at bee health is that in Vermont, not this year, but in many years, we've had a longer period of warm weather, and that sometimes make the bees come out and there's absolutely nothing for them to eat. And that's a huge negative on bees, that what you really want is the weather to stay pretty much cold so they stay inside. They've got a food source that their caretakers have provided for them for the winter, and that these long periods of warm weather that we've had several years in a row over the last 5-10 years have caused bees to kind of act unusually. And that maybe that was one of the issues. We don't really know. There are a lot of different things that are affecting pollinator health, but there really was no way to actually tie neonics to that. Do neonics negatively impact pollinators? They're insects. So yes, it's an insecticide. Yes, if you directly apply that to bees, that is, they're not going to survive that. But their incidence of coming in contact with neonics in the Vermont environment is very, very low. And the Agency of Agriculture has done a great job of doing a lot of research. They put the little scrubbers at the entrance of the hives that caught the pollen off of bees so that they could test it and find out. They found a lot of different pesticides, some of them not even allowed to be used in Vermont in that pollen, but they didn't find neonics. So, you know, are they potentially coming into contact with pollen? There was an issue several years ago with what they call dust off, when farmers plant seeds in order to get just the single seed to go through the planter at the right time. They use a product that is viscous, so it has a little bit of a sandpapery kind of quality to keep them from sticking together. And that was causing some of the coating to come off. Companies responded to that. They changed their coating formulation. We have got some new, what they call fluency products being used that allow these products to go through the planter without having the coatings come off. So we're improving that technology all the time. But that was where some bees or other pollinators were encountering neonics, was right after planting in the spring. But it really wasn't when it was the corn was pollinating. That was not the issue.
And Margaret, just to build on that, I just say to you, like you hear Margaret say, you know, the companies want to respond when there's an issue and trying to find a solution for these growers. So, you know, as you work through some of these policy issues, we've got good technical, you know, PhD scientists on board. So if we can be a resource, or you know, have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. One area I wouldn't mind shifting to, and I know it's something new that maybe it's not new, but it's been recently, bills recently introduced, is PFAS. You know, we're seeing these bills across the United States and look at it for our team here, look at it for the impacts on agriculture, right? And so one thing I would say to you, and I can let others on the call here weigh in as well, but for the PFAS bill that was introduced here recently in Vermont, right now for PFAS in pesticides, there is a FIFRA exemption for products registered by FIFRA. And we support that. We're actually putting a pretty big effort into Maine this year to try and get that same FIFRA exemption in the Maine law. And so I'll say a couple things to you on pesticides that have PFAS in them. You're only talking about 13 to 16% of pesticides, so it's not a lot. But again, I would point back to that long study process that's done, that average of 12 years from, you know, the beginning R&D stages to EPA approval. You know, there are sometimes 150 studies that are reported into EPA as these pesticides go through the approval process. And so these pesticides that have PFAS in them, it's there for a reason, again, to help, to help in the soils to make the product do better and survive. So it's there, you know, for reasons is why I would say to you. In addition, it's gone through this very deep testing process, both with the companies and at EPA. So as the bill has been introduced from an agriculture standpoint, we support that. I'm going to turn this over here to you, John Gata, if you want to speak to it a little bit as well. But the one thing I'd say to you in Maine that has changed is, you know, the last couple of years, the Maine growers were not organized on this topic. And the farmers are a bit frustrated, and why Maine is different from every other state in the country in this regard as it relates to agriculture. You know, they feel like automotive and airplanes came in and got themselves exempted. Why wasn't agriculture looked at? So we're trying to work on that in Maine this year. So just wanted to share with you that we support how the bill is drafted with that FIFRA exemption for pesticides. But John, why don't I turn it over to you if you have any thoughts to add on that?
Thanks, Stephanie. I think very well covered. I would just add, PFAS is a very broad term. It encompasses many different types of, chemistries, and specifically when we're talking about PFAS as it relates to pesticides, when it's intentionally added, we're looking at different carbon structures that we believe makes these pesticides, behave the way they do. And like Stephanie has said, they're in there for a reason, and we know that because of the rigorous testing, that these types of PFAS that you might deem having PFAS, using a very broad definition, this one carbon definition that is being used in the state of Vermont and a handful of other states. That's unfortunately when you have, people saying that there's PFAS in pesticides. If you reclassify, or if you broaden, shrink the scope, when you look at it as a 2-carbon molecule, that shrinks the number of pesticides that would be considered having intentionally added PFAS. So it's a very complicated subject. Maine right now is, the primary state in the United States that is banning all consumer products that contain intentionally added PFAS. Like Stephanie said, we are in the process of right now of meeting with legislators and asking them to understand that there is going to be a significant hit to the amount of products that will be available for growers and for pest control operators and for everybody if this goes through in 2032. And I can say with that long of a runway, there is going to be lots of fixes and changes, just as there has been for other industries. Industries that are based in Maine have gotten exemptions. So, what are we really doing here? It seems a little bit more, this is a business game than a human health game. So it's a very complicated subject, and I just wanted to reiterate that, the current exemption that exists in the bill is something that we remain supportive of, and we're thankful that our highly regulated status has been recognized in this legislation, just as it has been in a number of states. So this is not unique. There are many states that are either explicitly exempting pesticides or are not taking us up in these PFAS ban bills, because they understand that we are a unique chemistry and we are highly and heavily regulated. So I'll hand it over back to Margaret for more.
I just wanted to mention very quickly, Stephanie mentioned FIFRA, and because many of you are new to the committee, FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. And so it's the overarching regulatory framework that covers all of what we call in general pesticides, but that's what FIFRA is. And it's a very strict regulatory process that all of these products go through, whether they're a fungicide, insecticide, or a rodenticide. And one of the other things I would mention is that when people are talking about PFAS, what they're really worried about is persistency in the environment. And in general, that's why that one fully fluorinated carbon has been used, because that is kind of a symbol that they landed on for persistency. But one of the things that the EPA does consider when they have allowed intentionally added PFAS in some of these chemistries is that even though it has that molecule structure, it is not particularly persistent in the environment. And so that's what we really want to focus on. That the problem is that this very broad definition is bringing in products that actually are not the problem that we're really concerned about with regard to human health and safety. And so that's why using that incredibly broad definition is bringing in products in a variety of industries. And so you can tell that by the fact that, these chemistries are in pharmaceuticals. And so the drugs that you literally intentionally ingest in your body, some of them have PFAS in them. And so that's why we've had to come up with all of these exemptions for different products. And so there is the Agency of Natural Resources, I believe, is bringing forth a bill that has a slightly different definition that does not capture absolutely everything that has PFAS in it, but only those things that are persistent in the environment. And that's really what we're concerned about, are those products that are out there that are so persistent in the environment that they are causing negative impacts.
Maybe I'll just close on this and toss it over to you all for questions, and maybe keep this in mind as you're thinking about that PFAS law. is, you know, if you've got berries, you've got raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, but then you also have poisonous berries, right? And so you can't blanket regulate them all the same, right? And so I would look at PFAS in that way as well, right? We heard a scientist give us the analogy, you know, you can write the letters A through E on a chalkboard and you label those are letters. You could also label them as vitamins, right? And if you label them as vitamins, they're all very different. And so PFAS ends up being this broad name for these molecules, and you've got to look at them differently because some of them, you know, you like Margaret said, are not as persistent in the environment. Other ones that, you know, some of these manufacturers have moved away from making are bad for the environment. So it just, you know, you have to keep that in mind as you're looking at it. But I'll stop at that and turn it over to you all if you have questions for us or any other topics you want to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Margaret for reminding me of some of the testimony we heard last year regarding the pollinator situation, and make the other members of the committee aware. If you're looking at beehives, and that was, I think, the main reason that whole banning on neonics came about, the varroa mite was clearly the biggest challenge for bees, followed closely by the weather. And Margaret talked about the winter kill, and that only makes sense. But the other one that we kind of lost track of was beehive management. And sometimes people don't do as good a job managing what they have as they might. And then down the list, and I don't know if it was 7th or 8th or 10th on the top 10, but yeah, there's a negative effect for the neonics at some point, but it was clearly, to me at least, really minimal when you stack it up against the other variables that you know, a beekeeper might have. So I had forgotten about that. And the fact of the matter is, the agency here, agriculture agency, displayed great numbers. We've never had more beehives than we have right now. So it's not as negative as some of the folks portrayed when they testified on the bill. And again, there were some of us that just didn't buy it, but we were in the minority, and that's why it passed.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I just, you know, wanted to add that I mentioned earlier in this meeting that there were a handful of states that went and took very restrictive measures, you know, in 2015, 2016. I'm of the folks on this call, I've been in the industry, you know, probably the least 8 years of experience, but in my 8 years in this industry, I have never once gone into a committee room and had someone present to me any data that showed, because the state of Maryland or because the state of Connecticut went ahead and restricted these neonics, did the population of bees change in any significant way. Like Margaret mentioned, USDA puts out the numbers of bees every year, looking at the hives. It's up and down all across the country. There is no consistent measure of one thing or the other. And so just stressing to you that when you hear folks that come in and say, we must ban X pesticide because of its harm to pollinators, just know there has never been any significant data that has ever concluded pollinator health magically rebounded or grew because we banned X pesticide.
I thought the ironic part of it is to get rid of the mites is you sprayed your bees with pesticides.
That's absolutely true. And there's very few options for them with regard to mite control. And therefore, that was one of the issues that the Agency of Agriculture found, is when they were testing the pollen at the entryway to a lot of these hives, it was very clear that some beekeepers, out of total desperation probably, were using products that weren't generally approved for that practice. But they are trying a lot of different options, trying to save their hives.
Yep.
Well, good. Many.
I'm all set.
No. Anything else you guys like to share with us today?
No, we just really appreciate the opportunity to come in and have this conversation. And please call on us at any time if you have any questions about any of the products or the issues that our industry deals with.
Thank you. We appreciate you. You're very helpful with us, and appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be talking again.
Thank you, Senators.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Committee was, yeah,
I wanna, cut the, one more second.
sure.
Can you, just take me to the genesis of this and why, I mean, I understand. But it seems as if this was so restrictive as opposed to what it could be. Like I know, California just did it for residential. But just listening to this and not being in that testimony just seems like, okay, we're just banning the whole thing. Why did it go so restrictive last year?
I can add something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it came over as a House bill.
Okay.
So it started there and the House Agriculture Committee took testimony on it and we had, Robin Chestnut Tangeman, for instance, was, I think, the sponsor of the bill. He's down my way or was. And came in and testified that there was a study from Cornell and they used some of the stats there to try to show that there was a direct causation between using the treated seed and the bee population. And we had refutations from the Agency of Ag that it just wasn't ever proven that that was true. So we took a lot of testimony. We talked to beekeepers who had cornfields right next to their hives and had no significant impact one way or the other. So I was convinced that it wasn't time to make that strong a
Drastic,
law.
yeah.
And it just didn't work.
What happened is they come up with a compromise because it's raw power, Senator. It's raw power. When you have raw power of something that they want to get done, they're going to get it done. And so what this committee did is they tried to come up with the best compromise of what it was, which was to delay it as long as you can to give the seed manufacturers more time to do something with it. And so they did delay it until 2031, which was something that was 2 more years longer than what it was, because if you didn't do something, it was just going to get banned. So they come up with a compromise on it out of this committee. Then it got on the Senate floor. And then the people that had the raw power said, no, that's not good enough. We want even more, and hammered it some more and got rid of 2 extra years that probably would have gave the seed companies something longer to, or at least to study the effects of and put an end date of it. But the reason why I had this speak when we first all got here was for 2 reasons. One of the reasons was it was for you two. It was for you two because you're on a committee that is in a minority. And I never wanted to ever put the minority in this committee in a spot to where they thought that, oh, well, it's just raw power. They're just going to ride over the top of us. That would never happen here. So that's why I said that we're not a political committee. We are a committee that we're only going to do with what is best for agriculture. Because basically that's what happened last year when this thing got passed. It was just raw power that came over the top. You weren't going to stop it. The best thing you could do was come up with the best compromise. And they did that. Even at that time, the chair of this committee didn't want to take the bill up. He was told he would bring it up. And so he did bring it up. He was going to just not even bring it up, but he did bring it up, come up with the best deal that he could, and then got pounded on the floor even more on it, and then ended up voting against the bill after the governor vetoed it. So that's where it's politics sometimes that gets there, that not the best decision is made. And that's why I gave the speech the very first day that we were here, that we would always be a committee that took and did with what was best for what we were charged with, which was to be an agricultural committee.
Do you think there's any appetite to reinstate the additional 2?
That's a great question.
It's a great question. It's why we're visiting it again. It's why we're looking at it again, to bring it back to a decision based on agriculture. And
because it seems like the Cornell study was really the only impetus for this and the only data that they had.
Well, there was other testimony as
Okay.
well. It just, I have a tendency to lean more heavily toward things that help dairy farming. And growing corn is a big part of dairy farming.
Yeah.
You're going to feed the cow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I realize that I'm prejudiced in that respect, but that's just the way I feel. So if the testimony had shown me absolutely that there was a direct causation between putting neonics in the ground and bees, I would have voted the other way, but I wasn't convinced that way. So, you know, it's a policy decision. As the chairs indicated, the folks, maybe the other side had a little bit more voting power, and really that's what it came down to.
Because, I mean, and I'm just looking, it's of May of last year, and 11 states have this in some, it's not nearly as restricted. I mean, Vermont is, you know, Vermont, and look, Rhode Island, New York, but some of it's just like landscaping, non-commercial things that so I don't know. This was compelling to me, you know. But look, granted, I've only heard one side, so
Sure,
I'm gonna hear the other side.
And we will. That's another thing I promised you, and that's the thing I've said. The very first day that we were in here, we had an exchange between you two, where one was one way and one was the other. And it was like, well, at the end of it, that's what I want. I want to know, and I want you guys to make your minds up on what you hear, what you've done. And we're gonna do that. We're gonna get all sides of it. And your question was that is there an appetite? Well, maybe there might be, but before we can have the appetite, let's work more as a committee to hear and let's get all sides of it. You know, let's get it so that it's not one way. Let's get it so that you can make the best decision for agriculture, not just because of, you know, what it is. So, and we will have other testimony.
And that's, you know, kind of what I was going for.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's hear the other side.
this was compelling to me.
Yeah.
You know,
you had asked if it's tied to New York, and it's tied to New York. So if New York doesn't go into effect, it doesn't go into effect.
Okay.
Vermont. If it's repealed in New York, it's repealed here.
So
There might be a lot.
I should have remembered that provision, but I didn't.
Well, that's what I was looking up when you.
Thank you, Rob. That's important to know.
From my point of view, I don't know nearly enough about this to say anything.
Right.
one way or the other.
I didn't either till last year.
Right, yeah,
Right.
I can imagine, as, you know, listen to these folks, I mean, they have a particular viewpoint. Sure, my general take on things, though, is it just happened. And undoing it immediately, and this might be my whole lawyer precedent thing, where you have a precedent and that means something.
Right.
It lasts forever until you know it doesn't work anymore. My general sense is, you know, don't mess with it if it's brand new.
Right.
But we'll be hearing a lot more.
I can tell you this, is that we're a 2-year committee.
Yeah.
We
oh,
wouldn't
yeah.
do anything on it this year. And it would be in the second biennium.
Yeah.
If we were gonna do anything, it would be that. I just want you guys to learn more about it. And I wanna
and
hear.
that's absolutely it. You know, I don't know, this was
It is
one
bad.
side, but I will say this was it's really compelling to me, you know, to give you pause. And I always try to go by data,
Right.
you know, I try to go by data. So
That is the right way. What I would say is the right way. It's the way that I live my life as well. There is a lot of times, and there has been a lot of times where I've dug my heel in this building as well. I can remember, well, we had a conversation in another committee just yesterday about where I stood on something. But as I was sitting there saying what I was saying, I was like, there's been lots of times in this building where I have had my own opinions of it, but as we keep on working through the process of, my mind has changed. And it has, because it was based on data. It was based on with getting all of the best data that we could and then say, okay, I can remember talking to my chair in transportation. I'm just not gonna be able to support this. And at the end of the day, I did. In fact, so anyways.
okay.
We'll keep on going. We'll keep on seeing some more. I don't want to, we're going to do it in bits and pieces as far as where it is, because I think it is going to be until next year. And so we'll get some more people in and we'll hear the outside of it.